Photography is a curious medium. It has an illusory relationship with truth and a peculiar relationship with time. It has a contingent relationship with facts, a singular relationship with things, and an essential, elemental relationship with light. There is in photographs an odd conflation of intimacy and distance, the real and the surreal, and of revelation and deception. I am drawn to each of these elements, as well as to their contradictions, and to the impossibility of reconciling them completely. For me, the process of making photographs is a visual, intuitive dialogue with light and the world it illuminates. At its best, it becomes an active meditation on possibility. Each image marks a still point of attention along an unpredictable line that charts my movement from one encounter to another. Dayton is so ordinary that it is almost mysterious. There is something sweet and dumb and mournful about it, something plain and worn that is so utterly real you can hardly imagine it's worth noticing. I have not sought to transcend that, nor do I wish to scorn or glorify it. Because I live here, it is my resource by default. But I am intrigued by the challenge of doing something interesting with such a limited and unlikely resource. Between 1995 and 2004, I created a body of work about Dayton that I entitled Somewhere, for reasons I won't explain. I worked on several other projects during that period, both in Ohio and in Europe, but I kept returning to Somewhere. Those images of my adopted hometown are only in a cursory way related to traditional documentary photography, although they are closer to that sensibility than anything else I have done. My intention was to reflect my experience of a place that is achingly familiar and quintessentially American. Georgia O'Keeffe once remarked about Alfred Stieglitz that she never knew him to go anywhere to make a picture. As it happens, I like few things better than going places to make pictures. But I also believe that I should be able to work on my doorstep. So since Dayton is where I live, it is also where I photograph when I am not making pictures elsewhere. I have spent a lot of time in London, especially over the past 12 years or so. Although I love being there, it has always been a difficult place for me to photograph. In 2004, however, I decided I would spend several hours every day for about 6 weeks going to a different part of London each day and walking for miles. Doing so with a tripod and a heavy medium format camera added to the discipline of my routine. Each morning I would catch the first tube train to a different part of the city, walk around for a few hours, then return to the center to teach a couple of classes from mid-morning through early afternoon. Then I would head off in another direction for another long hike with the camera. My view of this city has little in common with the London of tourist brochures or the backgrounds in popular movies, just as my pictures of Dayton would never be featured by the Chamber of Commerce. The London I was looking for is grim, anonymous, and bleak. These are photographs about being boxed in and closed out. They reflect the existential condition suggested by Jean-Paul Sartre's famous play, No Exit. This is even more apropos when you consider that the English equivalent of the original French title, Huis Clos, is closest to the legal term, in camera. Alternative translations have included Dead End and No Way Out, which are also suitable descriptions of the condition depicted in my photographs of London. In keeping with this view, these images represent the urban environment as alienating, frustrating, and anxiety-inducing. They indicate that one can become lost and trapped in the most ordinary kinds of inner-city space. The photographs in Somewhere reflect a sense of place that is still about presence, but one that is threatening to devolve into absence. By the time I returned to Dayton as a primary focus of a new body of work in 2009, 5 years after the London work and following some other very different projects, I was responding almost exclusively to absence. I did not know when I began this work that the London pictures from 2004 would come to appear as a conceptual as well as a temporal midpoint between these two bodies of Dayton work. The earlier Dayton pictures and those of 2009 are drawn from essentially the same locations. This could hardly be otherwise given the small size of this city. But the pictures themselves, while clearly related, are also quite different. The earlier work, in addition to being in color, emphasizes idiosyncratic aspects of urban personality. This later work, stripped of color and starker in its perspective, reflects my own changing vision of this place and the declining fortunes of the city itself. Population has been dropping for decades now. One industry after another has left town. The school system is in crisis. The downtown feels empty on the busiest of days. And the usual register of the city is somewhere between melancholy and despair. I would add that things do seem to be looking up slightly at the moment. So it is not surprising that these Dayton pictures from 4 years ago reflect a sense of abandonment and loss. The things I photograph often look like monuments that have been left behind, still vaguely commemorating a largely forgotten past. At the same time, I should note that in nearly all of my work, this theme persists of entropy and battered formality, of the evidence and relentlessness of time. In the next body of work, I took an almost archaeological approach to a micro-environment I discovered in Dayton. I had an opportunity to explore the inside of a 19th century building that has a curious history. It has been standing empty and unused for many years. I was particularly taken by the interior walls on the topmost floor, a place that had served as a club, a speakeasy, a ballroom, and even as a small roller skating rink, among other things. I arranged to spend several hours alone in cold, empty, silent rooms studying those walls that were redolent with time and unknowable stories. In my most recent Dayton images, I have chosen to avoid, for the most part, showing anything likely even to be noticed, let alone given attention, by anyone. In saying this, I am not falling back on the shop-worn conceit about finding beauty in what others overlook. That is not my point at all. But I am interested in a symbolic rather than an exclusively literal visual language, and I am more drawn to ambiguity than to the obvious or the predictable. I don't strive to be obscure, but at the same time, I don't want to make things simpler than I think they really are. This approach will, I think, be clear in this final set of images from Dayton. Not that the earlier work was ever really objective, but this is particularly subjective, abstract, and intuitive, and it is by far the most closely related to the work I made in Nanjing. The sequence of photographs that I will show you now of images I made last year in China has nothing to do with the chronological order of their making. Regardless of when during my residency they were made, I chose to begin this sequence with images that overtly reflect an awareness of traditional Chinese aesthetics, however limited my understanding of that subject may be. From there, the pictures move to various ways in which I have translated these aesthetics into my own visual language, although I believe something of that initial influence is present throughout the entire body of work. Photography is always a medium of translation and interpretation, at least as much as it is one of documentation. So every one of the 66 images I will show you from China, in common with all the others you have already seen, is, in addition to being an illustration of what was in front of my camera, more importantly, an example of how I have selected, translated, and interpreted what I encountered. As you have seen, I don't pretend to be objective, nor do I believe that such an effort could succeed even if I attempted it. I am interested in following my curiosity and seeking out evocative details that reflect a particular way of seeing. My work is made from chance encounters, hints, glances, and intimations. Making photographs is one of the ways in which I learn best, not so much about what I photograph, but about being alert to possibility, about being receptive, and about perceiving correspondences between the things of the world and my state of mind, the presence of my body, and the condition of my heart.